The new app today. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
45 degrees at O'Hare. Next news, 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And as a transcendentalist, Ralph Waldo Emerson got something fundamentally wrong, which is that people are inherently good. But he got so much else right. And he offers one of the greatest distillations on language that you'll ever read. Let me just excerpt it, and the relevance will become apparent. The corruption of man is followed by the corruption of language. When simplicity of character and the sovereignty of ideas is broken up by the prevalence of secondary desires, the desire of riches, of pleasure, of power, and of praise, and duplicity and falsehood take place of simplicity and truth, the power over nature as an interpreter of the will is in a degree lost. Hundreds of writers may be found in every long civilized nation who for a short time believe and make others believe that they see and utter truths, who do not of themselves clothe one thought in its natural garment, but who feed unconsciously on the language created by the primary writers of the country, those namely who hold primarily on nature. The simplicity of character and sovereignty of ideas is broken up by secondary desires. Such a key phrase to explain what he means by the corruption of man followed by the corruption of language. So you have ulterior motives, and thus you redefine words to mean something they don't mean, or you present words to mean something that they don't mean. And this was, in part, this piece by our friend Lionel Shriver reminded me of that passage from Emerson. Lionel Shriver is a contributor to The Spectator. She's also the best-selling author of We Need to Talk About Kevin and the Motion of the Body Through Space. And her most recent piece in The Spectator that triggered my memory of that Emerson passage, Beware the Linguistic Trojan Horse. Lionel Shriver, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
As always, it's a pleasure.
What's the book you're never without? One of those banal questions you were asked recently that frames this piece that you wrote, which is anything but banal. And you gave a great answer. So what is that? And explained it. What is that answer?
It's my Webster's Third Collegiate Dictionary, which I've had since I was about 13 years old. And actually, I would think, if I were starting to read that column, that was a lame choice, perhaps a bit too obvious. But I find older dictionaries, this one's from 1969, invaluable politically, because what words mean or what words have imposed on them constantly changes, and the meaning of words is sometimes transformed for those secondary desires you cited. That is for political purposes.
Well, right.
A perfectly good example is this notion that we now have that sex and gender are completely different. Sex refers to biological reality. Gender refers to not just psychological reality, but also the set of behaviors and traditions that we impose on sex, which in the olden days meant sexual stereotypes, right? And there's a purpose to separating these two things, because the transgender movement is very big on the idea that sex is in the mind, and in fact they want to get beyond biological sex because it's inconvenient It's down to DNA, and it's immutable. So that's the purpose of separating off gender. It becomes fluid. Anyone can assume all these traditions and behaviors that are associated with sex, but you can't actually change your biological sex. But if you look at the Webster's Dictionary, those two words mean exactly the same thing. So this is a modern invention, this division. And, we can't change the fact that the word gender now conveys something other than biological sex. But it's useful to know that this new meaning is a very recent invention, and it is a political convenience.
One of the other wordplay pairs that you cite is one we've spent a lot of time talking about recently, as you well know, which and will continue to, as it ravages pre-K through post-secondary education and the business world and everywhere else, and that is equality and equity.
This notion that equality is referring to equality of opportunity and equity is referring to equality of outcome is also a completely recent confection, and it is also a political convenience, partly because equity and equality, which used to mean basically the same thing, they sound the same, right? So the politicians and educators can refer to equity, and it sounds nice, sounds fluffy and good. Who could have any problem with equity? Except that it comes with an enormous amount of baggage, which because equality of outcome implies, for example, rampant employment of racial and gender quotas. So it also comes with an implied support for the reparations movement. The idea is that whenever you see a disparity on race and gender in outcome, then that must be the result of sexism or racism and has to be readjusted.
Well,
but if you've thought about this issue, then you realize that equity, as we are now supposed to interpret the word, is another word for totalitarianism.
Yeah, right. Well, and something you said too, synonyms for equity, which would be also a Trojan horse, but nonetheless, you could have used the word fairness. Let's be about fairness or fair play, rectitude.
We never use the word fairness anymore.
Right, and isn't that it? And so it goes back to something you said. Equity sounds like equality. So the actual word choice from its synonyms, that's purposeful as well.
Yes, and to my despair, I'm afraid that Biden and his whole administration no longer uses the word equality. It's all equity, which is forbidding. I mean, Kamala Harris had that little cartoon advert before the election that got all too little attention, explaining the difference between equality and equity and how much more important equity is. I mean, Kamala's big on this whole movement.
Well, how did
which,
she describe
also implies, among other things, radical redistribution of wealth.
Okay. What about patriotism and nationalism?
That's an interesting one as well. Again, in the dictionary, it used to mean exactly the same thing. And it means love of and devotion to country. But more recently, we have made a distinction between the two words. If you're a nationalist, you're a bad patriot. That is, implicitly, you're a racist. But the left is very keen on keeping the distinction between bad nationalism and good patriotism. So they can still love their country, but what is underneath this distinction is really your relationship to immigration enforcement. So a nationalist, an evil an evil nationalist wants to enforce immigration law and have controlled legal immigration, whereas a patriot can advocate open borders.
Well, right, and the nationalists, it's not nationalists, it's white nationalists. That's the phrase that's used now. It's white nationalists. So what you describe nationalists being redefined as a bad thing, now you attach white to it, so it's a doubly bad thing, and the two reinforce each other.
I mean, a more accurate term is ethno-nationalist, which means that you are committed to a certain ethnicity, keeping your country a certain ethnicity.
Well, right,
but nationalist is pejorative, but it didn't used to be.
And so going back to equity too, and the Kamala Harris video, the end of that, she includes this statement: equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place. Equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place. And, that's taken as an unalloyed good. We all we all don't want to go to the same place. We all don't want to end up in the same place. But no, we want to be in the same place, and the same place as defined by people like Kamala Harris. It's actually rather pernicious.
That implies that if we all have the same results, it doesn't matter what we do.
Right.
It doesn't matter what our capacities are. It doesn't matter what our educational attainment is. Doesn't matter how much effort we go to. Doesn't matter whether we work. We all get the same thing. I mean, that's communism. That's not even socialism.
And it
didn't work out very well.
Yeah, the word was what the word used to be out about that, but now that's being purged from Wikipedia and the textbooks as well. I wonder, where you think this goes. I mean, some people are sort of dismissive of the idea that, if somebody wants to be called this, if somebody wants to use this vernacular, let people describe themselves and describe the natural world however they want. But, if you believe what Emerson said, which I do, you can't just let this go. You can't let the corruption of the language go.
Well, language is used for a lot of secondary purposes. On the left, it's often used to signal fellow travelers. So you're indicating to others by using a particular language that you're on side, you're part of the team. But I'm okay with that. It means that a lot of people are speaking in jargon and sound incredibly tedious. But go ahead and wear the T-shirt. Where I draw the line is when this lingo, which is constantly changing, is imposed on the rest of us. So, suddenly we all have to say people of color, whereas if you say colored people, you'll all but be arrested. I find this distinction hilarious and patently absurd, but we all have to get with the program, Everyone has to say the right words, and that's where I'm annoyed. Like this term Latinx.
Oh, I hate that.
Apparently, Hispanics almost never, unless they're in academia, almost never use this term. It's not an invention from the ground up. It is imposed from above in universities, and suddenly we're supposed to all say Latinx. Well, if Hispanics don't use it about themselves, I don't want to.
Yeah, although give it time, because that small cadre of Marxists will, in positions of influence, will pound away, and 5 years from now, it will be a crime to say Latino or Latina and not Latinx the way things are going.
Well, the people who keep coming up with these things, I don't know, I guess they're underemployed.
Overemployed.
Do not rest until they impose them on the rest of society. So it's very difficult to resist. I have the good fortune to write primarily in nonfiction for a magazine that doesn't require me to adopt a strict set of lingo. So I'm not forced to use this vocabulary. But, if I went back to writing for The Guardian, I would be.
Lionel Shriver, contributor to The Spectator, she was just referencing, also the best-selling author of We Need to Talk About Kevin, which was optioned into a movie you should check out as well as another bestseller, The Motion of the Body Through Space. Lionel Shriver, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
I enjoyed talking